Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to grecochess, the YouTube channel of chess. We continue with the videos from the underwater Moonlight Tournament. 81 players have started. We are now in the final round with 6 players. One has been thrown, so the other 5 players are fighting for the title, for the championship. And let's see if we can remember who they are. It is maximgovorukha from the Ukraine, aimammt from Indonesia, PG74 from Italy, China4 from Greenland, and Steam Rocket from Australia. In this video, we have one more game. The 5 players, of course, are going to play a total of 20 games. Among them, 5 times 4 is 20. We have already covered 7 of them. 8 have been completed. And in this video, we're going to cover the 8th game that has been completed, the most recent one. And it's the one where aimammt from Indonesia is facing maximgovorukha from the Ukraine. But let me first share the screen with you, or to be more exact, the part of the screen with the chessboard. And let me click the necessary buttons, and here we are. You see that with the white pieces is aimammt from Indonesia with a rating of 1466, facing Govorukha from the Ukraine, the rating of 1808. It's the second game they played. The first one with the white pieces, Maxim Govorukha won the game, and now it's the other way around. aimammt has the white and Maxim Govorukha has the black pieces. See if aimammt can equalize the score or if Maxim Govorukha will go for the second win or if they're going to tie. These two players are the ones that have defeated everybody else until now, and they are the main contenders. Also, you may notice the following. First of all, we're only sharing a part of the screen because we don't want to spoil it. The rest of the screen would have shown how the game proceeded and what were the next moves. And also you're going to see that the starting position is not the one we're used to because this is a thematic tournament. The players have agreed to start from this position after move 6. You see here the 0.0, meaning the computer thinks at this point the game is exactly even. And aimammt will play his first real move, his first choice, but the 7th move of the game. And no surprise here, like everybody else. What do you do in this position? Fianchetto, bishop goes to g2, and you control the diagonal from a8 to h1. Time for Maxim Govorukha. Most players until now have replied placing the pawn to d5 to block the diagonal, but Maxim Govorukha has a different idea. Also, it is a book move. You see this book here means that this move is from opening theory, has been extensively analyzed in the past, and should come as no surprise. And Maxim Govorukha plays something different. Another book move, bishop to b7. Basically telling aimamtt, you want to place your bishop in g2 in this diagonal. I'm going to place it in b7. So the diagonal from h1 to a8 gets both white colored bishops. Short castling for both sides. Short castling for aimamtt. Short castling for Maxim Govorukha. And now aimamtt wants to develop the knight and sends it to c3, in fact, the b1 knight, because that's what you want to do in the opening. Develop your pieces as much as possible, ideally towards the center. Knight goes to c3. And we've completed all the book moves. You see the little booklet here. And now Maxim Govorukha is going to play a move that the computer thinks it's a mistake. Knight to c6. The artificial intelligence coach says the following. The better move was to strike at the center with a pawn, and they indicate to the green arrow that this would have been the best move. Pawn goes to d5. But Maxim Govorukha's move also makes some sense. You want to develop your pieces and control the center. So you develop the knight on b8, and at c6, it exerts pressure on the square of e5 and d4. And let's continue. Pawn to e3 for aimamtt that wants to create a chain that goes from f2 to e3 to e4, a pawn chain. Computer thinks it's a miss, would rather have the pawn go to e5. The code says that was a critical move here that was easy to overlook. Perhaps. I'm not sure I would have played this myself because sending a pawn forward, especially when it can be captured, is a committal move as it's called. You cannot take it back. Yes, it would make a nice change from a2 to e5, but you have immediately, from a2 to d5, there is the e6 pawn that can take it. At least it stops the pawn from d7 going to d5, the previous best move for black. Let's continue. Rook to b8 for Maxim Govorukha. Another miss, another chance to place the pawn to d5, which Maxim Govorukha missed. Why did he want to do it? Okay, you don't want your rooks to be on the diagonal that is controlled by the bishop. Oh, that's not exactly controlled. That is where the bishop might strike, the g2 bishop. Let's do it again. The diagonal that goes from h1 to a8. We finished 10 moves, and what is the score? aimammt is leading by 1.68. Again, the coach had said the best option for black was to strike at the center with a pawn, and they saw clearly with the green arrow what they mean. Orange arrows are mine, what I want to discuss. Green arrows is what the computer thinks would have been the best move. Let's continue. Rook to e1 for empty. Once again, the computer wants both players to place a pawn on d5, and when they play anything else, it's a miss or inaccuracy. And now finally, Maxim Govorukha places the pawn to d5, and you see the exclamation point, which means it's a great move. And the code says only one good move here, and you spotted it. This tracks at the center with the pawn trying to gain space. And you see that the advantage of aimammt suddenly becomes much smaller, 0.5. Knight to e5 for aimammt, and we exchange on e5. Govorukha takes first, then aimamtt takes back. Unfortunately for him, he doubles his pawn on the e file. You don't want to have e pawns, actually double pawns unnecessarily, especially since the e5 is not easy to be defended. Knight to d7 for Maxim Govorukha, of course, saves the knight, but computer would rather have it be on e4. Pawn to f4. Yes, the f4 pawn protects the e5 pawn for aimammt, but the problem is it weakens the e3 pawn. That's why computer would rather have first to take the d5 pawn. And the code says advancing the pawns in front of the king can compromise the king's safety. You might remember from the latest rated game I played at the Queen's Chess Club, the Ed Competitive Memorial, my road to victory started exactly when my opponent placed pawn to f4. By the time things were different because due to a bishop on this diagonal, a knight that was on e5 ended up, there was a pawn at the default spin, so I was able to win material out of thanks to the spin. This is not the case here, but there is a similar thought that pushing pawns in front of your king is not always the best of ideas. And let's see how game continues. Maxim Govorukha will take the pawn on c4. Best moves as a computer. Pawn takes back, b, pawn takes back. Not a good idea, says the code. The code says this is not the right idea, and the only way you can find the right idea is looking at the green arrow, meaning exchange of b7. The problem with the c4 pawn here is that it is isolated, meaning there are no pawns on the b or d file that can protect c4, so if attacked, can only be defended by pieces. And you don't want your pieces to, instead of doing anything better, to just defend a pawn. You want your pieces to be active and start attacking. But let's see how game continues. Knight to c5 for Maxim Govorukha, just a good move as a computer. This check mark, which in reality means not so good. Again, the computer wants the player to start exchanging light-colored bishops, but you know the saying: to trade is to take is a mistake, and don't trade unless you get paid. Uh, just to tell you, to give credit, these phrases belong to Igor Smirnov from the Remote Chess Academy, and I'm going to use them quite often because they indicate the thought process. That's why Maxim Gorka may have been reluctant to exchange, and so was aimammt in the previous move. Now we finished 15 moves, and what's the score? Maxim Govorukha is ahead with zero point 0.5. That doesn't mean too much, but before it was the other way around. AMT started developing an advantage. But let's see how the game is going to continue. Pawn to e4 for aimammt. This is a mistake as a computer. And the coach says the game was close to balance, but now black has a winning position. Let's see if it is the case. Again, the coach wants exchange of light-colored bishops. Would rather have aimammt taking his bishop from g2 and sending it to b7. Of course, the rook will take it back, but it's better than what happened, according to the coach. And what does Maxim Govorukha do? He takes advantage of the open diagonals and sends the queen to d4 with a check. Great move, says the computer. This took advantage of a mistake, and black now has a winning advantage. A strong fork hits two targets at the same time. You see what's happening from a small advantage of 0.5. Now Maxim Govorukha has a large advantage of 3.2. And you can see the fork, both the king is attacked, the check, and the pawn on c4. King to h1 for aimammt, that must address a check. And now Maxim Govorukha decides not to get a pawn, but instead plays the knight on d8 and attacks the bishop on d2. It's attacked twice by the queen and the rook, defended only once by the queen. Let's do it again. Queen and rook, and defended only once by the queen. So this is a problem that aimammt must need to address one way or the other. And one way is to take the bishop sending anywhere else. The other way is to have a second piece defending. While in the meantime, the pawn on c4 is still for grabs. The computer would not like Maxim Govorukha to have taken the c4 pawn. Instead, would rather have the knight go to d3 and attack the rook on e1. But still, this is an excellent move. You see the thumbs up. What does aimammt do? Bishop to e3 attacks the queen, but this is a one-move attack. Well, of course, if Maxim Govorukha falls asleep and forgets to save the queen, the game can suddenly change, but most likely this is not going to happen. The coach says be3, meaning bishop to e3, is an inaccuracy. The best option was to add a defender to a vulnerable bishop. So, what? I'm saying what? Because the arrow show knight goes to d5. But if you do this, the knight is lost. And second, it does not follow the advice of the computer, the advice of the coach. That's why I think there is a contradiction among what the computer thinks and what the coach is saying. Let's go back. What would happen if knight went to d5? If knight goes to d5, yes, temporarily the bishop is safe because the rook doesn't have access to the bishop. But the pawn can go to e6 and take the knight, and you're losing a piece for nothing. But if this happens, no, the bishop cannot even go here because black will just exchange queens. It's not that the queen is under attack. But okay, this is the case. The coach and the computer seem to disagree. But let's continue now. Bishop to e3, as we said before, a one-move attack towards the black queen. Computer does not like it at all, and this gives an enormous advantage of 5.2 for Maxim Govorukha. But how does he reply? Queen to c3, yes, it was a free knight. That is why the computer does not like it. Free piece for Maxim Govorukha. You see now that, yes, the bishop was saved, but the knight now was lost. Star, the best move. 5.2 advantage for Maxim Govorukha. That's the best move. Queen to e2 for aimammt, that does not give up. In fact, plays the best move. That was the star indicates here. Bishop to e4 for Maxim Govorukha wins another pawn. Materially, Maxim Govorukha has what you see here as a +4. A piece plus a pawn. Rook to c1 for aimammt. Excellent move. Attacks the queen, although the best would have been to win the bishop. And of course, maximgovorukha, being a heavy material, wants to change. They say don't trade unless you get paid, and the payment is approaching a winning ending. And bishop finally exchange. The bishop on e4 for Maxim Govorukha takes the aimamt's bishop on g2, and this means that Maxim Govorukha does not have to worry any longer about his light colored bishop. We finished 20 moves and what the score 5.2 advantage for Maxim Govorukha. That is important. Still, Maxim Govorukha may make mistakes and lose a game, but AMT it will be very difficult for him to win. And of course, no surprise, AMT takes back the bishop. Queen to d3. Maxim Govorukha wants more exchanges. If the queens can be exchanged, we are much nearer a winning ending. And let me tell you in advance, and that's what's going to happen. Exchange of queens for AMT is not a good idea, not only because you are behind, you don't want to exchange, but because the knight on d3 will have a nice fork, and we're going to see this. AMT took the queen. You don't want. Computer thinks it's excellent. I personally think it's a mistake. Queen should have gone to f3 to be safe, at least for now. And who knows, with the queen, so long as the queen's at the board, the player with more material may blunder the queen. Or there might be a combination out of nowhere winning the queen. But now without the queens, you don't have to worry about it. In fact, now what's going to happen is Maxim Govorukha is going to use his knight to take the queen and not the rook, because now this wonderful knight is forking the rook on c1 and the rook on e1. So it's not enough for Maxim Govorukha that is exchanging well ahead, but now he's going to win even more material, at least one more exchange. Rook to e2 for AMT, at least say one of the two rooks and give only one chance for Maxim Govorukha, telling him either you take the rook now or never. Of course, it's now for Maxim Govorukha. AMT will take back the knight. You see, +6 is the material advantage of Maxim Govorukha. 5.6 is what the computer says. Rook to d3. Maxim Govorukha now can easily place his rook near AMT's position because not too many pieces remaining to block it. Rook to c2 for AMT wants perhaps to protect the c4 pawn. The other rook to d8 for Maxim Govorukha that has two rooks on the open d file. Has more rooks on the open d file than AMT has on the entire chessboard. We finished 25 moves and let's see the score 5.7 for Maxim Govorukha, approaching victory. But will it come? Let's see. AMT places a king on f2, tries to place a king near the action. Bishop to c5 with a check for AMT. Excuse me, for Maxim Govorukha wants to make active the other piece as well. Has two rooks in the open, d file, and the bishop. It's not the long. Yes, it's the second longest diagonal that goes from b7 to g1. And of course, the diagonal where is the white king located. And of course, AMT needs to move the king, sends it to e2 near the action. And Maxim Govorukha places his knight to d4, so the knight is not near the king. I'm not sure what you gain by that. Excellent moves as a computer, solid choice as a coach. King to f3 for AMT, and rook goes to d1 for Maxim Govorukha. Of course, presses the bishop on c1, but it's defended by the rook on c2. But any pressure you exert, even if it doesn't give immediate results, usually strengthens your position. One of the best moves, says the coach. King to e2 for AMT wants to be near the white rook that's defended near the black rook on d1 that's defended only by the other rook on d8. And rook goes to h1 for Maxim Govorukha to safeguard his king. And it could go if empty does nothing. The threat is rook goes to h2 check, and then the king cannot go either d3 or d1, and the rook on c2 is lost. Skewer is a technical term for this kind of tactics. But empty is not going to allow it. King to f3, and the other rook goes to d1. So now Maxim Govorukha has two rooks on the first rank, attacks the bishop on c1 that's protected. Two rooks attack the bishop that's defended only by the rook on c2. 30 moves have been completed, and the advantage of Maxim Govorukha a little bit less than below from before. From 5.7 becomes 5.6. But still, it's an enormous advantage. And let's see what's going to happen. Bishop to b2, aimammt, the best move. Pawn to h5. So Maxim Govorukha wants to see if he can start a pawn rush, as it's called, a pawn attack. Aimammt tries to stop it, pawn to h4. And Maxim Govorukha is going to check with his rook from d1 to f1 check. King to e2. Inaccuracy, says the computer. The code says this misses a better way to evade a check from the opposing rook. And not only that, m6. If Maxim Govorukha plays perfectly, he's going to checkmate in 6 moves at most. Will this happen? Let's give a look. Rook to f2 with a check. Best moves, the star, m5, 5 moves. This is the strongest option, says the coach. King only move, you see the white arrow in the grayish bluish circle, only move, that's what it means. No other choice. The move is forced. King goes to d3, the only legal move. And now it is m5, making 5 moves at most. Rook goes to d1, check from Maxim Govorukha. The coach says this continues down the road to checkmate, against the best move. Mating 4 moves at most, and aimammt places the king to c3. Inaccuracy, that's what the orange circle with a question mark and the exclamation point means. And m1 means that next move, if Maxim Govorukha finds the correct move, he checkmate. And even if he doesn't find it, he's very near victory. But will he find it? Let's see. And yes, he finds it. Rook to f3. Rook to f3. You checkmate. You can see the rook cannot be taken. No piece can go between the rook and the king in d2 or d3. And the king cannot go anywhere. b4, d4 covered by the bishop at c5. b3, d3 covered by the rook on f3. And the last square is d2 covered by the rook on d1. So this concludes the game in 35 moves. Maxim Govorukha has a second win against aimammt. He's the only player that has all wins in all the games. Maxim Govorukha, if you remember, was placed second in the grecochess tournament I had organized a few months ago, just behind Barak 7. But let's now change screen and see what does the computer think about the overall game. Let's share the screen again. And you're going to see 91.2 percentage for Maxim Govorukha versus 72% for aimammt, and Maxim Govorukha played as if his rating was 2050, above his 1808, while aimammt played as if his rating was just 900, well below his 1466. Let's see the various categories. No brilliancies, 2 great moves for Maxim Govorukha, 3 versus 2 book for aimammt, 10 versus 7 best for Maxim Govorukha, 12 versus 10 excellent for Maxim Govorukha. 1 good move for Maxim Govorukha, 5 inaccurate. Now these are the positive parts, the negatives. Five bets for aimammt. I'm sorry. Five inaccuracies for aimammt. Mistakes, one mistake each of them. Misses, two for aimammt, one for maximgovorukha, and no blunders. This concludes the coverage, and now that we've shown all the games that have been completed, let's see the standings. Of course, in the standings, we'll include the 2 points against Mepius that has withdrawn. You see the arrow means he has withdrawn. And if you include these points, out of a maximum of 10 points, Maxim Govorukha is leading with 6. 6 wins and 4 games still in progress. We're going to cover them after they've been completed. aimammt is next one, has 2 losses from Maxim Govorukha, has 4 points. PG74 also has 4 points, 1 loss from Maxim Govorukha, 1 from aimammt. And then Steam Rocket has 2 points for defeating Mebius and no other games, while Sinan Fu has 2 points, 2 wins, but also 4 losses. 12 more games to go to see who is going to emerge as the eventual winner. And the only players without a chance are Sinan Fu and Mebius, who has withdrawn. And Sinan Fu is still playing, but even if he wins the remaining games, he cannot become the champion. We'll cover the remaining 12 games as they complete. But until we have any more games there, we have the bots. I'm continuing facing the chess.com bots. The most recent we defeated was Lee from Taiwan, and let's be honest, when I say defeated, after we lost, I had 2 wins in the end, once with white, once with black, but I had 3 losses from Lee. So yes, I defeated eventually, but the overall score is against me. Lee, let's see, overpowered me 3 versus 2. And now let's see what's going to happen with Charles from England. Charles from England. The next 2,000 rated bots, and if I can survive there, then is Fatima from Lebanon, and then the 2,100 Manuel from Portugal, and Oscar from Sweden. And then we got the Masters with 2,200 Nora from Norway, Noam from Israel, Ahmed from, I think I'm not sure which country is that. We'll see later. I think it's Syria, or I'm not sure. And then the 2,200, these are, yes, Sakura from Japan. And then 23, Arjun from India, Francis from the Philippines, yes, Sophia from Denmark, and 2450, Alexander, most likely from Russia, Luke from the United States, and Wei from China. These are the 2450. Let's see how many can we do. I'm not too optimistic. I don't think we can go all the way until Wei from China. But that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to all of you that have been watching, to the subscribers. If you have not done so, please consider subscribing. To the viewers, the comments and the likes. This is the channel grecochess. I'm your host, Harilas Eniziris. To all of you, goodbye.